The gunshot was the only warning he got. It wasn't meant for him, but in the New Mexico desert, a bullet doesn't much care who it finds. It screamed past his ear, a hot, angry hornet that kicked up a puff of red dust just inches from his boot. He was off his horse midnight before the echo even finished bouncing off the canyon walls. Another shot, then another, followed by a sound that made his blood run colder than a mountain stream in winter. Screaming. It was high-pitched, thin, and laced with a terror so pure it felt like a blade twisting in his gut. This wasn't a squabble between prospectors. This wasn't a bandit raid. This was the sound of something primal, something hungry. Most folks would have spurred their horse in the opposite direction. The desert has a way of swallowing up heroes. But Ezra Hawthorne wasn't most folks. He was a man running from a past full of ghosts, and he'd learned the hard way that the only thing worse than facing a nightmare is turning your back on one. He pulled his Winchester from its scabbard, the familiar weight a cold comfort in his hands. Midnight snorted, nostrils flaring. The horse smelled it too, the copper tang of fresh blood on the dry air. And something else, something musky and wild. The screaming had stopped, and the silence that replaced it was 100 times worse. It was a silence full of teeth. He moved low and fast, using the scattered boulders for cover. The moon was full and bright, painting the sandstone formations in shades of silver and bone. It was beautiful, in a deadly sort of way, a predator's moon. Then he heard it, a low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate up from the very rock he was hiding behind. He peered over the edge, and his heart hammered against his ribs. It was a camp, or what was left of one. A small Apache canvas shelter, ripped to shreds, supplies scattered like fallen leaves. And in the center of the chaos, two bodies lay still and dark by the embers of a dead fire. An old man and an old woman. But they weren't what the growls were for. Huddled behind an overturned wagon were two little girls, Apache girls. The older one couldn't have been more than 10, the younger maybe 8. They were pressed together, their big dark eyes wide with a terror that had stolen their voices. Encircling them, like sharks in a bloody sea, were the wolves. But these weren't just any wolves. They were huge, their gray fur matted and dark with blood. Their ribs showed through their pelts, and a desperate, rabid hunger burned in their yellow eyes. These animals were starving, pushed past the edge of reason. The biggest of them, a monster of a beast with a scarred muzzle, took a step toward the children, its lips peeled back, revealing fangs like ivory daggers. Ezra didn't think. He just acted. He raised the Winchester, lined up the sights on the big one's chest, and held his breath. He had to make this shot count. One miss and the pack would be on those girls in a heartbeat. But just as his finger tightened on the trigger, the wind shifted. His scent, the scent of man and horse and sweat, washed over the campsite. Every single wolf turned, their yellow eyes locked onto his position. The low growls rumbled in unison, a chorus of death. The hunt had just become mutual. The lead wolf forgot the girls. It had new prey. It lowered its head and began to stalk toward Ezra's hiding place, silent as a ghost. The other two fanned out, flanking him, moving with the terrifying coordination of a seasoned killing team. Ezra's mind went cold and clear, the way it always did when death was near. 3 wolves, 3 rounds in his rifle. No room for error. He centered the sights on the charging beast. Time stretched. The world narrowed to the space between the rifle's hammer and the wolf's heart. He fired. The crack of the rifle was deafening. The lead wolf stumbled, a dark flower blooming on its chest, but it didn't fall. It let out a roar of pain and fury and charged even faster. A wounded animal is the most dangerous thing in the desert. Ezra worked the bolt action, the metallic shick-shack a sound of grim purpose. He ejected the spent shell, chambered a new one. The second wolf was closing in on his left. The third was cutting off his escape to the right. He fired again. This time the lead wolf dropped, skidding in the dust to a halt just feet from his boots. But there was no time to breathe. The other two hit him at the same time. He threw himself to the side, feeling the hot breath of one on his neck as his jaws snapped shut on empty air. He rolled, bringing the rifle around for his last shot. The wolf that missed him landed, spun, and launched itself again. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. The bullet caught the beast in the throat, and it went down in a heap. 2 down, 1 to go. But the last wolf was smart. It had seen its pack mates fall. Instead of charging, it began to circle, staying just out of rifle range. It was a patient, calculating killer, its golden eyes never leaving him. And Ezra's rifle was empty. His Colt revolver was heavy on his hip, but a pistol was a fool's weapon at this distance. He needed it to get closer, and this wolf wasn't going to make that easy. Behind the wagon, the two little girls watched, their faces pale masks in the moonlight. The older one still clutched a broken piece of wood, a useless talisman against the nightmare unfolding before them. The wolf feinted left, then right, testing him. It was looking for an opening, a moment of weakness. It was a game of nerves, a deadly dance under the desert moon. Ezra slowly, deliberately, reached for his Colt. The movement was tiny, but the wolf saw it. Its ears pricked. It crouched low, muscles coiling like springs of steel. The moment his hand touched that gun, it would charge. The desert held its breath. The wind died. There was only the sound of his own heart, a frantic drum against his ribs. His fingers closed around the familiar, checkered grip of the revolver. The wolf's eyes narrowed to slits, and then the world exploded into motion. The wolf launched itself forward, a gray blur of teeth and claws. It moved faster than anything that big had a right to. But Ezra had been waiting for this. Every gunfight, every ambush, every near miss of his life had been practiced for this single, perfect second. The Colt was in his hand, roaring before it even cleared the leather. The first shot hit the wolf in the shoulder, spinning it sideways. The second punched through its chest, right where its heart should be. The animal hit the ground, twitched once, and then lay still. Silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the canyon. Ezra stood there, the revolver smoking in his hand, every muscle screaming. He listened, for the sound of more wolves, for anything. But there was only the whisper of the wind. Slowly he holstered the Colt and turned toward the wagon. The two little girls were still there, huddled together. They stared at him, their eyes huge and dark. They didn't know if he was a savior or just a different kind of monster. He approached them slowly, his hands open and visible. He knew enough about the Apache to know they had every reason to fear a white man with a gun. The older girl spoke first, her voice a tiny whisper in the Apache tongue. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the question. "Are you going to hurt us?" He shook his head and tried the few Apache words he remembered from his cavalry days. "I am a friend," he managed, his accent probably butchering the language. "I help." The younger girl, who had been silent through the whole ordeal, finally broke. Sobs racked her small body, the terror and grief of the night pouring out of her all at once. Her sister wrapped her arms around her, murmuring words of comfort, but her own eyes never left Ezra. He knelt a few feet away, making himself smaller, less of a threat. He pointed to himself. "Ezra," he said. Then he pointed to the dead wolves and made a slicing motion across his throat. "The danger is gone." The older girl nodded. She understood. Looking around the ruined camp, Ezra pieced together the story. The grandparents, the girls, traveling alone. Maybe fleeing something. They'd made camp, thought they were safe. But the wolves, driven by a desperate hunger he'd rarely seen, had attacked. The old couple had fought and lost. He gathered what he could from the wreckage. A half-full water skin, a few strips of dried meat, 2 blankets that weren't too badly torn. It wasn't much. The nearest town was days away, and he knew 2 Apache children wouldn't be welcome there. The nearest Apache settlement, if he could even find it, was just as far. He couldn't leave them. The desert would kill them in a day. Rattlesnakes, bandits, or just the sun. No, like it or not, Ezra Hawthorne had just inherited 2 lives. He offered them the water. The older girl took it, drank a little, and then gave it to her sister. She looked at him over the water skin, a question in her eyes. "Why? Why did you help us?" In her world, white men didn't risk their lives for Apache children for free. He struggled for an answer. The real reason was a tangled mess of guilt and a desperate need for redemption. But that wasn't an answer for a child. So he just pointed to them, then to himself, and then he made a gesture of shielding them with his arms. Protection. Some things didn't need word. She seemed to understand. For the first time, he saw the tension in her small shoulders relax just a little. The younger girl, seeing her sister's trust, looked at him too. The terror in her eyes was still there, but now there was a tiny spark of something else. Hope. He sat down, his back against a rock, and began to clean his weapons. The familiar, methodical clicks and scrapes were calming. It gave him something to do while his mind raced. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of gray and pink, a new worry began to gnaw at him. The wolves. Their attack wasn't right. Packs didn't usually attack a defended camp like this, not unless they were starving or something else. And there was something about their eyes, a frenzy that went beyond simple hunger. It felt like they were driven. Sent. The older girl stirred. She spoke a single word in her sleep. A name. Probably for one of her grandparents, lost in a dream where they were still alive. Ezra looked out over the vast empty desert. They had survived the night, but he had a sinking feeling that the wolves were only the beginning. The real danger was still out there, in the dawning light. And it was coming for them. The first rays of sun hit the dead wolves, and Ezra saw something he'd missed in the dark. On the flank of the Alpha, the huge beast he'd shot first was a mark. It wasn't a brand from a rancher. It was a symbol, painted in what looked like dark red clay. A jagged spiral with a single dot in the center. It meant nothing to him, but it wasn't natural. It was a sign, a message. These wolves hadn't just stumbled upon the camp. They were sent. They were weapons. And that meant someone, somewhere, wanted this family dead. All of them. The girls were waking up. The older one sat up, her eyes immediately finding the still forms of her grandparents. A fresh wave of grief washed over her face, silent and devastating. The little one woke to her sister's sorrow and began to cry softly. Ezra gave them a moment, then approached. "We have to go," he said gently. "It's not safe here." The older girl wiped her eyes with a dusty hand and looked at him. Her English was broken, but her gaze was sharp. "You, white man, why you help us?" He gave her the simplest truth he could. "Because you needed help, because it was the right thing to do." She studied his face, searching for a lie. When she found none, she nodded. "I am Ayana," she said, touching her chest. She gestured to her sister. "This is Helona." Her voice caught. "Our grandfather was Natan. Grandmother was Desba." The name hit Ezra like a physical blow. Natan. He wasn't just any Apache. He was a legend. A war chief who had refused to surrender, who had run circles around the U.S. Army for years. They called him the Ghost of the Mesas. And the bounty on his head was enough to make a man rich for life. If these were Natan's granddaughters, this wasn't just a random act of violence. This was an assassination. "Where is your mother?" he asked, his voice low. Ayana's face darkened. "Father killed by blue coats. Mother sick. Very sick. Grandparents took us to find medicine plants in sacred place." The story clicked into place. A dying mother, grandparents on a desperate mission, and two little girls who were now the last of Natan's direct bloodline, hunted by an unknown enemy. "Where is she now?" Ezra pressed. Ayana pointed southwest, toward a distant hazy line of mountains. 3 days, hidden place, by water. 3 days for a healthy adult. For him, with 2 exhausted, grieving children. A week, maybe more, if they were lucky, if they weren't being followed. And they were definitely being followed. He could feel it. The sense of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. The choice was clear. The smart thing would be to take them to the nearest fort. Let the army handle it. But he knew what that meant. They'd be used as bait to trap Natan. They'd end up on a reservation, their spirit broken. He'd seen it happen 100 times. He looked at Ayana's proud, tear-streaked face. He saw the ghost of the man he used to be, the man who believed in honor. "Can you find the way?" he asked. "To your mother's camp?" She nodded, her chin set with grim determination. "Grandfather teach me. I remember." "Then that's where we're going," he said. Relief washed over her face, so profound it was heartbreaking. Then she looked at him, a deep, old worry in her young eyes. "Is far. Dangerous. He knelt down, meeting her gaze. Your grandparents died protecting you. In my book, that makes us family. And family doesn't leave family behind. He said the words, and as he said them, he knew they were an oath. He was tying his fate to theirs. The drifter was done drifting. Ayana spoke rapidly to her sister. Little Helona, who hadn't said a word, looked at him with wide, wondering eyes. She asks, if you are a warrior spirit, Ayana translated. She says only spirits fight like you fought the wolves. Ezra almost laughed. A spirit. If only she knew. He was just a broken man trying to piece himself back together. Tell her I'm just a man, he said. But sometimes a man's got to do what a spirit would. He got them ready to leave. He loaded the girls onto Midnight's broad back, their small weight nothing to the powerful stallion. He took the reins, leading them away from the place of death, southwest toward the mountains and a dying woman. As they walked, the sun climbing higher in the sky, he couldn't shake the image of that symbol on the wolf's hide, a jagged spiral. It was like a brand on his mind. They traveled until the midday sun became a merciless hammer. Ezra found a shallow overhang of rock that offered a sliver of shade. They huddled together, the heat pressing in on them. Ayana had fallen into an exhausted sleep, but little Helona was awake. She was staring out at the shimmering heat haze. Suddenly she pointed. Man, she whispered. Ezra's head snapped up. He followed her tiny finger. Far out on the salt flats, maybe a mile away, a figure on horseback was watching them. A dark, solitary silhouette, distorted by the heat. Just a man, watching, waiting. Ezra's blood ran cold. He pulled the girls deeper into the shadow. The figure didn't move. It just sat there on its horse, a patient vulture. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was the man who had sent the wolves. And he wasn't going to let them reach those mountains alive. The game had changed. This wasn't just a journey of survival anymore. It was a hunt, and they were the prey. They traveled by night when the desert was cooler and the shadows were their friends. The watcher was gone, but Ezra knew he was still out there. He could feel the man's presence like a change in the air pressure before a storm. Ayana guided them with an instinct that defied logic. She read the stars, the shape of the land, the direction of the wind. She was her grandfather's blood, through and through. They found hidden springs and game trails that cut days off their journey. On the second night, they stumbled upon it, a scene of utter carnage, a cavalry patrol. 8 soldiers and their horses sprawled in a dry creek bed. They'd been cut down in an ambush. Arrows bristled from their bodies. It was Apache work, swift, silent, and lethal. Natan's warriors protecting their land. Ezra's past came rushing back, the smell of gunpowder and fear. He had worn that same blue uniform. He had been one of them. Now he was on the other side, hiding from them, with 2 Apache children who saw these dead men as a victory. The world had turned upside down. He searched the bodies, not for valuables, but for information. Most were just young men, barely out of their teens. But one man was different. He wasn't a soldier. He was older, dressed in civilian clothes, and in his cold, dead hand, he clutched a small, strange object. It was an amulet, carved from dark wood. It was shaped like a jagged spiral, with a single dot in the center, the same symbol from the wolf. Ezra's heart pounded. This man wasn't with the patrol by accident. He was guiding them. But to where? And why did he have the mark of the wolf sender? A cold dread crept over him. The enemy wasn't just one man. It was a conspiracy. And it was bigger and more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. He took the amulet. It felt cold in his hand. Wrong. They pressed on, the image of the dead soldiers haunting Ezra's steps. They were entering Natan's territory now. Every shadow could hold a warrior. Every gust of wind could be a warning. They were climbing into the foothills of the mountains when it happened. One moment, the path was empty. The next, they were surrounded. Warriors, at least a dozen of them. They materialized from the rocks and the trees, silent as ghosts. Their faces were striped with war paint, their rifles held at the ready. Their dark eyes were hard as stone. A tall, powerful warrior with a scar across his cheek stepped forward. He looked at the girls, then his gaze fell on Ezra. and it was filled with pure, undiluted hatred. Ayana slid off the horse, her small body trembling, but her voice strong. She spoke in rapid Apache, telling their story. The wolves, the death of her grandparents, the white man who had saved them. The lead warrior listened, his face a mask. When she was finished, he spoke a single harsh question. Ayana's face went pale. "What did he say?" Ezra asked. Ayana wouldn't meet his eyes. "He asks, why you carry the sign of the snake?" She pointed to his hand. "To the amulet." The warrior barked in order. Two of his men grabbed Ezra, wrenching his arms behind his back. They tore the amulet from his grasp. The leader took it, his eyes blazing with fury. "This is the mark of Taza!" He spat, the name like a curse. "The shaman who poisons our people with dark magic. The one who whispers lies in the ears of the white men. He is a traitor, and you are his friend." Ezra's mind reeled. A shaman. Tasa. This wasn't just a bounty hunter. This was an internal war, a power struggle within the Apache themselves. "I am not his friend," Ezra said, his voice level despite the rifle barrel pressed against his spine. "I took this from a dead man, a man who was leading soldiers into your land." The warrior sneered. "A likely story. A white man with the snake's mark, bringing the last of Natan's bloodline home. Or are you leading us into a trap?" He was trapped. They thought he was an enemy spy, a collaborator with a dark shaman. In their eyes, he was worse than a soldier. He was a snake. Suddenly, little Helena, who had been a silent ghost for days, found her voice. It was small, but it cut through the tense standoff like a bell. She spoke in Apache, her words tumbling out in a rush. She told them everything. The snarling wolves with the glowing eyes, the thunder of the white man's guns, the way he had stood between them and death. She didn't tell a story of a soldier or a spy. She told a story of a spirit who fought like a mountain lion. The warriors listened. The hardness in their eyes began to soften. Children, especially traumatized children, did not lie so convincingly. When she finished, the leader looked at Ezra with new eyes. He was still suspicious, but the certainty was gone. Doubt had crept in. "If you are not with Tasa," the warrior said, his voice a low growl, "then you have walked into a war you do not understand. Tasa wants Natan's power. He believes the chief's line is weak. Cursed." He paused, his gaze heavy. "Sakira, the girl's mother. She does not suffer from a simple illness. She has been poisoned with Taza's magic, a slow death that withers the soul." The pieces slammed together in Ezra's mind. The sickness, the wolves sent to kill the heirs, the shaman Taza making a play for leadership. This was a coup, and he and the girls had just walked right into the middle of it. "Her only hope," the warrior continued, "is a root that grows high on the spirit mountain, the moon petal. But the mountain is Taza's territory. He and his followers guard it. No one has been able to get through." He looked from the girls' desperate faces to Ezra's grim one. "You say you are a friend," the warrior challenged. "You say you fight like a spirit. The spirits of this mountain will kill any man who is not pure of heart. Taza's warriors will kill the rest. Prove you are who you say you are. Bring us the moon petal. Save the daughter of Natan." It was an impossible task, a suicide mission, to go alone into the heart of an enemy's territory, to face a dark shaman and his warriors, to find a mythical cure on a haunted mountain. Ezra looked at Ayana and Helena. He saw their mother, a woman he'd never met, wasting away from a poison born of hatred and ambition. He saw the oath he'd made over the bodies of their grandparents. Family doesn't leave family behind. "I'll need a horse," Ezra said, "and more ammunition." The warrior's name was Kale. He was Natan's right-hand man, his eyes holding the weary weight of a long, losing fight. He gave Ezra a wiry pony that could climb like a goat, a pouch of jerked venison, and 2 boxes of cartridges for his Winchester. It was a gesture of hope, not of faith. "The mountain is a 2-day ride," Cal said, sketching a map in the dust. "Taza's men watch the main paths. You must go through the Canyon of Whispers. The old ones say ghosts live there. They steal the breath from your lungs if your spirit is weak." "I've got enough ghosts of my own," Ezra muttered. "They'll have to get in line." He looked at the girls. Ayana's eyes were filled with a desperate plea. Halona simply reached out and touched his hand, a small, trusting gesture that tightened the knot of responsibility in his chest. "I'll be back," he promised. It felt like a lie. The Canyon of Whispers earned its name. The wind moaned through the narrow rock formations, creating eerie, shifting sounds that sounded like voices, like warnings. The air grew cold, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe at the edge of his vision. Any other man would have turned back. But Ezra pushed on. The faces of the two girls burned into his mind. He rode for a day and a night, stopping only to rest the horse. He felt hunted every step of the way. He would catch glimpses of movement high on the ridges, the glint of sun on a rifle barrel. Taza's sentries. They were letting him get deeper into their territory. They were herding him into a trap. He found the base of the Spirit Mountain as the sun was setting on the second day. It was a jagged peak that clawed at the sky, wreathed in mist even in the dry air. Cal had told him the moon petal only grew in one place, a cave just below the summit, a place that was sacred and heavily guarded. He left the pony tied in a hidden thicket and began to climb. The rock was steep and treacherous. The ghosts of the canyon were nothing compared to the feeling of this place. The air was heavy, charged with a strange energy. It felt like the mountain itself was watching him, judging him. He was halfway up when the first warrior attacked. He came from above, silent as a hawk, a knife flashing in the moonlight. Ezra threw himself sideways, the blade slicing through his sleeve and grazing his arm. He rolled, bringing his Colt up, but the warrior was on him, a whirlwind of muscle and fury. They fought on the narrow ledge, a desperate, grunting struggle hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. This warrior was different from Kale's men. His eyes were wild, glazed over with a fanatical light. He fought not with skill, but with a berserker's rage. Ezra managed to get a foot under him and heave. The warrior stumbled back, his arms windmilling for balance. For a horrifying second, he teetered on the edge. Then he fell, his screams swallowed by the darkness below. Ezra lay there, his chest heaving, his arm burning. This wasn't a patrol. This was a death squad. Taza knew he was coming. He pushed on, climbing higher. The mist thickened, swirling around him, turning the world into a gray, confusing maze. He heard more sounds now. Chanting, the beat of a single drum. He was getting close. He found the cave. The entrance was a dark slash in the rock face, and standing before it were two more of Tasa's warriors. They stood like statues, their faces painted with the same jagged spiral he'd seen on the wolf. There was no way to sneak past them. It had to be fast and loud. He took a deep breath, centered himself, and stepped out from behind the rocks. "I'm here for the moon petal," he called out, his voice steady. The warriors looked at each other, then back at him. A slow, cruel smile spread across one of their faces. They raised their rifles. Ezra didn't wait. He dropped to one knee, the Winchester already at his shoulder. The first shot took the smiling warrior in the chest. The second came a heartbeat later, catching the other man as he tried to dive for cover. The two shots echoed across the mountain like a judgment. He ran into the cave, his heart hammering. The drumbeat was louder in here, hypnotic and evil. The air was thick with the smoke of strange incense, and in the center of the cavern, illuminated by a flickering fire, was Taza. He was a small, wiry man, his face a web of wrinkles and tattoos. He wore a headdress of crow feathers and the hide of a black wolf. His eyes were like chips of obsidian, burning with a cold fire. He was the one beating the drum. And growing in a crack in the cave floor, glowing with a soft, pale, silvery light, was a single, perfect flower. The moon petal. "The white man," Taza hissed, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "You have a strong spirit to have made it this far, but your journey ends here." He stopped drumming. He reached into a pouch at his belt and threw a handful of black powder into the fire. It erupted in a flash of green flame, and the smoke billowed out, thick and choking. Ezra's head swam. The smoke smelled of rot and decay. The cave walls seemed to melt and run like wax. Taza's form shimmered and distorted, his shadow stretching and growing into something monstrous. "You walk in a world of flesh and bone," the shaman's voice echoed in his head, no longer coming from his mouth. "But I walk in the world of spirits, and here I am king." The shadows coalesced, taking the shape of wolves. Not real wolves, but things made of darkness and fear, with eyes of burning green fire. They stalked toward him, their silent snarls promising a death far worse than mere teeth and claws. Ezra's hand went to his Colt. But how do you shoot a shadow? How do you fight a nightmare? His mind reeled, the poison smoke dragging him down into darkness. He saw flashes of his past, the faces of the men he'd killed, the cavalry charge at Crying Woman Creek, the Apache women and children falling under the Army's guns, the ghosts he'd been running from his whole life. They were here. Taza was using his own guilt, his own pain, as a weapon against him. "You are a killer," the voice hissed, "a butcher of women and children. You are not worthy." The shadow wolves lunged. He was going to die here, on this cursed mountain, choked by his own demons. And then, through the haze of smoke and fear, he saw something else. The faces of Ayana and Helona, their trusting eyes, their desperate hope. Family doesn't leave family behind. The oath, the promise. It was an anchor in the swirling chaos. He wasn't that man anymore. He wasn't the cavalry scout who followed orders. He was Ezra. He was their protector. He raised his Colt, not at the shadow wolves, but at the shaman. "I'm not here for your spirits," Ezra grunted, fighting for every word. "I'm here for the flower." He fired. The bullet wasn't aimed at Taza. It was aimed at the stone wall just behind him. The slug struck the rock, sending a shower of sharp stone fragments flying. Taza cried out, not in pain but in surprise, shielding his face. The distraction was all Ezra needed. He ignored the shadow creatures and lunged forward, diving for the moon petal. His fingers closed around its delicate stem, just as a wave of dizziness threatened to pull him under. He ripped it from the rock, root and all. He rolled to his feet, clutching the glowing flower, and staggered back toward the cave entrance, gasping for clean air. "You cannot escape your fate!" Taza shrieked from within the smoke. Ezra stumbled out into the cool night, the silvery light of the moon petal pulsing in his hand like a second heart. He didn't look back. He scrambled down the mountain, rocks sliding under his boots, his lungs burning. He had the cure. But as he ran, he knew this was far from over. He hadn't killed Taza. He had only shamed him. And a man like that would not forgive. He would not stop. The race back to the hidden valley was a desperate, feverish blur. Taza's warriors were everywhere now, no longer hiding, but openly hunting him. Arrows whispered past him in the dark. Rifle shots echoed through the canyons. They hounded his every step, driving him, relentless. He barely slept, pushing the pony to its limits, his own body running on pure adrenaline and the light of the moon petal, which he kept tucked inside his shirt. Its cool silver glow seemed to ward off the worst of his exhaustion, a small miracle in a world gone mad. As he neared the hidden valley, the pursuit grew more frantic. Taza knew he was running out of time. This wasn't just about Ezra anymore. It was about preventing the cure from reaching Sakira. He burst into the valley not as a returning hero, but as a hunted animal. Kale's warriors met him at the entrance, their faces grim. They had heard the sounds of the running battle. They formed a defensive line, firing back at Taza's men, giving Ezra the cover he needed to get through. He didn't stop. He rode straight for the center of the village, for the largest dwelling, vaulting off the pony before it even came to a stop. He burst inside. The scene was worse than he had feared. Sakira was fading. Her breath was a shallow, rattling whisper. Her skin was pale and translucent. Nish, the old medicine woman, was chanting over her, but her prayers were desperate. Ayana and Helona were huddled at their mother's side, their small faces streaked with tears. "I have it," Ezra gasped, pulling the glowing flower from his shirt. Nish's eyes widened. She took the moon petal with a reverence that was almost painful to watch. She immediately began to crush its root with a stone pestle, mixing it with water from a small clay bowl. But just as she was about to give the medicine to Sakira, a shadow fell across the doorway. Taza stood there. He wasn't alone. Behind him were his most fanatic warriors, their faces painted for war. The villagers scattered, crying out in fear. "You are too late, white man," Taza hissed. "The spirits have already claimed her. Her weakness has tainted this tribe for too long. Now, a new, stronger leadership will rise." He was making his final move. He was using this moment of crisis to seize control. Kyle and his warriors were still at the canyon entrance, holding off the main force. Taza had slipped through in the chaos. Ezra drew his Colt, his body screaming in protest. He was exhausted, wounded, and outnumbered. "You'll have to go through me," he said, his voice a low growl. Taza laughed, a dry cracking sound. "I will not have to. My people will see the truth. They will see that your medicine is useless. They will see that her time is over." He raised his hands and began to chant in a powerful, booming voice. He was performing a ritual of banishment, a spell to sever Sakira's spirit from her body before the medicine could work. Sakira began to convulse, a thin line of foam on her lips. "Do it now!" Ezra yelled at Nish. The medicine woman brought the bowl to Sakira's lips, trying to pour the liquid down her throat. But it was too late. The shaman's magic was too strong. Desperation clawed at Ezra. He had fought too hard, come too far, to fail now. He looked at Taza, at the source of the poison, the hatred, the darkness. He couldn't out-magic him. He couldn't outfight his warriors. He had to change the game. His eyes fell on the amulet he'd taken from the dead man, which Kyle had returned to him, the sign of the snake, Taza's sign. "You talk of truth, Taza?" Ezra's voice boomed, silencing the shaman's chant. He held up the amulet. "Then tell the people the truth about this. Tell them how you conspired with the whites, how you led a cavalry patrol into your own lands to kill your own chief's family." A gasp went through the assembled Apache. Taza's eyes widened in shock and fury. "Lies!" he shrieked. "Is it?" Ezra pressed, walking forward, his gun still trained on the shaman. "This was found on a dead white man, a guide leading soldiers. He was wearing your mark. You promised them silver from the mountains. You promised them Natan. All you asked for in return was for them to kill 2 little girls and their grandparents." He didn't know if it was true, but it was close enough. It was a story that made a terrible kind of sense. Doubt appeared on the faces of Tasa's own warriors. They were fanatics, but they were not traitors to their people. Conspiring with the blue coats was the one unforgivable sin. In that moment of hesitation, Nish succeeded. She forced the medicine down Sakira's throat. For a long second, nothing happened. Sakira lay still, terrifyingly still. Taza smiled, a triumphant, ugly thing. "You see, it is over." And then Sakira took a breath. It wasn't a gasp or a rattle. It was a deep, clean, life-giving breath. Color began to flood back into her cheeks. The light of the moon petal now inside her began to glow faintly through her skin, a soft silver aura that pushed back the shadows. The poison was broken. The curse was lifted. Taza stared, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. His power, his lies had been shattered. He had lost. He let out a scream of pure fury and lunged, not at Ezra, but at the recovering Sakira, a wickedly curved knife appearing in his hand. He never made it. Kyle was there. Having pushed back the attack at the entrance, he had arrived just in time to see Tasa's final, desperate act. His movements were a blur. He met Tasa's charge, and the shaman's scream turned into a wet gurgle. He staggered back, Cal's knife buried to the hilt in his chest, and fell dead on the floor of the dwelling. Silence descended. The battle was over. In the days that followed, the hidden valley began to heal. Sakira's recovery was slow, but it was steady. The light of the moon petal had saved her life, and the love of her daughters was nursing her back to health. Taza's followers, their leader dead and his treason revealed, surrendered to Kale's authority. The war was over. Ezra found himself in a strange position. He was no longer a stranger, an outcast. He was a hero, the man who had saved the chief's daughter, the man with the warrior's spirit. He was offered gifts, honor, a permanent place in their community. But he was still a drifter at heart. His boots were getting itchy. A week after the battle, as he was packing his saddlebags, Sakira sent for him. He found her sitting outside her dwelling, wrapped in a blanket, watching her daughters play by the stream. She was still frail, but her eyes were clear and strong. "You are leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "It's time," he replied. "This is your home, not mine." She looked at him, her gaze deep and knowing. "My daughters? They have no father. My people have no one to bridge the world between us and the whites. a world that is coming for us whether we want it to or not. You fought for my children as if they were your own blood. You faced down a dark spirit for a woman you had never met. That is more than a debt. That is destiny." She paused, then spoke the words that would change his life forever. "I am not a dying woman making a desperate offer," she said, her voice full of a quiet strength. "I am the daughter of Natan, and I am asking you to stay. Be a father to my children. Be a brother to my people. Be my husband." Ezra looked at Ayana and Helona, laughing as they splashed in the water. He saw their future, a hard road in a changing world. He looked at Sakira, at the courage and grace that shone from her. He thought of his own empty past, a life spent running, and for the first time he realized he wasn't running from something anymore. He had been running to something, to this, to them, to a family, to a home. He slowly unbuckled his gun belt and laid it on the ground. "I reckon," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "my horse could use a long rest." Redemption wasn't a place you could find on a map. It was a choice. It was a promise. And as he sat down beside the woman he would marry and the children he would raise, under the watchful eyes of the desert that had tried to kill him and ended up saving him, Ezra Hawthorne finally understood what it meant to be home. What an incredible journey, right? From a lone drifter to a hero and a father. It just goes to show you that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you want to hear more tales of mystery, suspense, and incredible survival, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single strange and terrifying story. Let me know in the comments below what you think Taza's ultimate plan was. I read all your theories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.